Welcome to Shaping Stories, a Glass Artist podcast. My name is Dominique, and I am the host of this passion project. I'm so excited to introduce Amy today, and she's going to tell us a lot about her life and her over 30 years working with glass. Please stay tuned. As we begin, can you introduce yourself? What is your name and where are you from?
Hi, my name is Amy Lemaire, and I am originally from the Boston area, but currently based in Brooklyn, New York, where I live and work.
So you grew up in Boston, is that right?
Yeah, I grew up in Chelmsford, Massachusetts. Most of my family is still in the New England area, and it's a place where I do a lot of visiting. I haven't lived there since I was 18.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can we skip the glass part of your life for right now? And can you tell us a little bit about what you did as you were growing up and maybe any creative inspirations that you had as you were a kid?
Hmm. Well, as a kid, I was a maker, and I'm from a family of makers, and we all made together. For me, I learned studio practice early because it was life. We grew our own food at home. My parents are kind of like homesteaders. So we always had plenty of art making material growing in the yard. My days would be full of that type of thing, organized projects and improvised projects as well. And so I learned how to make just from interacting with natural environment mostly. Also, I was in like all different kinds of art lessons and sports and activities, total overachiever and interested and curious about so many things. I played a lot of instruments. I did art. I was also in a whole bunch of other like affinity group type, very active in my community.
So you got your art base really young.
Mm.
Did you did you end up going to college for art?
I did. I had a focus on art all through my formal education, K through 12 education. And I was lucky enough to have great mentorship in high school. And my family was very supportive of me being an artist as well. So I'm lucky for that. And then I ended up continuing on to art school. I went to School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And I moved from Chelmsford to Chicago after high school to pursue my undergraduate degree there. And then I ended up staying in Chicago after undergrad. I was there for about 12 years and I ended up staying and living as an artist and I started teaching and that's where glass comes into my life. But I was primarily a painter in undergrad and very focused materially and conceptually on painting. And so for me, that's really the baseline of my practice, just because for me, painting is connected to history and I can connect most other disciplines and dialogues to this foundation of painting. So it was really formative for me, my undergraduate degree.
What was inspiring behind your paintings as you were doing your undergrad degree?
So painting for me is a exploratory journey. I never know what's going to happen. I was never one of these painters who was interested in reproducing the world around me in an image. It's more, I'm much more excited by starting with a blank canvas and going on an adventure and having the painting, the activity of painting be the content, right? And the painting almost like becomes an artifact after, or like a visual philosophy. Painting was really engaging for me as a way to think and just kind of make sense of the world and engage with other makers and in the dialogue of painting through that.
And what was it like being a college student living in Chicago?
Oh, it was great. It was a lot of stimulation and a lot of all the senses and a lot of exposure. I lived in a suburb growing up and I had access to Boston as a city, limited because I was a kid. But when I got to Chicago, I had like full access to the city. And that was really eye-opening and challenging in a really inspiring way. So like one of the things that really is interesting to me is how in a city, there's all of these different systems that intertwine, right? And there's all different kinds of people and different activities all happening in the same space at the same time. And I just hadn't experienced space and time and community like that growing up. So Chicago became the new base level for me as an adult of living in an urban environment, entangled with all these other systems and people and communities.
What were you doing for fun besides art as you were like in undergrad? Were you working like a regular person job? Were you doing any kind of other activities outside of that?
See, in undergrad, I was hardcore into the material of paint, very interested in what paint can do and what it can't. right? And just sort of the limits of that artistic material. That was like what my kind of what my work was about. And so how that played out in my life, it kind of leaked into my employment. I ended up working for Sherwin-Williams and then for another like local paint company, seriously, like full time with a like an art for our doing R&D. I was a color matcher, custom color matcher for like corporate accounts because I could see the colors and I could match by eye and I was very fast at it. So I would do that on demand. All these contractors would bring in all these color samples, and then I was well known in the community for being the person who could match color in 10 minutes. And so I used to make all these cash tips because I could do it really fast and they were really accurate. So I kind of made a little sub career for myself doing that. And I had the opportunity when I graduated from undergrad to continue on. And Sherwin Williams actually offered me a job that I declined. They offered me a job to move to Cleveland and work in their corporate office to be an ambassador for rolling out their new color palette. And they wanted me to, I would have gotten to name the colors and also do basically like the lecture circuit to unveil the new color, to give language to why this color palette is the one that you should use instead of other brands, because I was really good at talking about color as well. But I didn't want to move to Cleveland, so I ended up, that was sort of the end for me working in for industrial paint manufacturers. And I moved on to floral design after that. And then I
Wow.
had a whole life doing that. Sort of in between undergrad and grad school. I had a whole life as a professional, high level floral designer in both Chicago and New York.
Wow, that's so
Uh,
cool.
yeah, it was an 8 year gap between my two undergrad and grad degrees. And this is sort of like what I was doing professionally. I maintained a studio. I was teaching glass flame working at this point, running a department, running a studio, and teaching at a school and doing community work as well with the glass making. Also maintaining my own painting practice and exhibitions and community work with that. Yeah, and so to support all of that, baby teacher, baby artist. I worked for almost full time for a local florist, and I was the creative designer. So I made all the designs that then the other designers would reproduce. And I was also the project manager, so I'm also good at organizing projects and deploying and stuff like that. So I ended up being a events coordinator and the senior designer there. And then when I moved to New York for grad school, I was able to get another job doing the same thing, a senior designer in at a like a flagship shop in New York City. And that's the job I worked all through grad school. It's like sculpting. That was how I learned how to sculpt. Floral design for me was the mark between working two-dimensionally and three-dimensionally. Kind of broke me out of this flatness that I was kind of taken as a given in painting. I was challenging that a little bit, but floral design really challenged how do I make something in three-dimensional space? Working with a organic material is it reminded me I actually have a lot of experience doing that because as a kid we grew all these plants and flowers and I had access to this as sculpting material throughout my childhood and I already knew the names of the flowers and how they behaved and stuff. That kind of primed me to be successful as a designer. And so that was really fun. And I did that for about a decade. It paid well. And I learned how to sculpt. That formed the basis of my sculpture work that I'm doing now, sort of the bridge.
Wow. Do you feel that do you feel like you had to be two people during that time? Your
Yeah.
artist self and then like a corporate self?
That is
Yeah.
a great question. Yeah, I have always had like all these parallel practices that are only now just starting to sort of converge in a formal way. But yeah, it just, I mean, I think survival kind of made me like just partition these different parts of myself until I could understand how they all fit together, which wasn't until much later. That partitioning allowed me, I had to work twice as hard because I have to work just as hard at both of these tracks, and one pays my bills and one basically costs money for the art path. So like they kind of evened out in order for me to get to the point that I'm at now. With the floral design, I always work for small businesses. I have some experience working for corporations, but that I don't really love that. I Small businesses are more my speed, and I'm a more of like a like kind of a renaissance person in my employment, where I usually am a person who wears a lot of hats, and I'm good at that. And so floral design was like that. I worked for a small business. There were only a few of us. I had a lot of responsibility across the business. Like I did all of the advertising and also all the documentation and all of the copy for marketing. So I learned also how to do like window dressing, graphic design, like a lot of other skills too were applicable. as well. So I like working for small businesses for that reason. You get to really exercise a lot of skills and have a lot of creative freedom. Well, depending on who your employer is, but I did. It really worked well. Our styles fit well together, and we had a really good run with both of those florists, trusting me with my vision, and then in exchange, I would make these like new designs that they could then market, and it was symbiotic. Yeah. And then I also learned through working for small businesses how to run my own business as far as project management skills, how all of the organizational tools work. And then I'm collaborating as well. So I learned how to collaborate effectively and how to work with a team. And those are all skills that I use to this day. They're very important skills, and they've allowed me to stay viable as an artist and to be able to keep my studio running and scale it.
Yeah. Did your glass practice start when you were in Chicago, or did it start before that?
It started in Chicago. It was my first summer, my summer after my first year of undergrad, School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I had been making beads out of like Fimo, out of like Sculpey clay, polymer clay, since middle school, and making beads and jewelry. And in high school, I would make beads and jewelry and sell them to the bead store, the local bead store, and barter for more beads. So I already had kind of a little bit of a relationship. And that's how I discovered glass was through those objects at the bead store, right? Some of them were glass. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then in undergrad, I ended up meeting one of my colleagues had been to Pilchuck in undergrad, one of my first friends, Jeremy Skidmore, who is an artist at University of Texas right now and works there. But he was my first glassy friend before we were both glassies. He had given me some glass beads, like right when we had met in Chicago. And so, I had these objects with me like that first year. They were like part of my life. I keep them in my pocket. They were just like nice objects that he had made. And then I got the opportunity to go to Oxbow to take like a summer workshop that first summer. There was a glass bead workshop. So, I kind of connected that to these objects that I had acquired. And I was like, oh, I think I want to learn how to make those. Right. So I signed up for the workshop. I went with some buddies from school, and like the rest is history, like came home with a torch, never stopped, started teaching all my friends. Recently, I was going over that period with like reminiscing about that period with my dad. And my dad said, oh yeah, we knew right after you came back from that workshop. Forget about the painting. It was all about the glass. He said he recognized that because I brought the torch to his house in Massachusetts. And I was like, Dad, you got to check this out. Glass blowing. It's amazing. Flame working. I have this great photo of me set up in my parents' kitchen with my hothead torch that's in my slideshows now still. So I was into it, and it was all about bead making. That was sort of like the sleeper cell of my practice for a while. Like, I just enjoyed it. It was a continuation of this need to make that I've always had since a kid. And I just would make beads, and I continued my hustle with the local bead store. I would make beads and bring them to the bead store and sell them or barter them. Or I started teaching as well, my friends, and then formally teaching. That's how I got into teaching. So the beads are the start of glass, but they're also very connected to community for me as well. And I can't untangle those things. Even now, they're like bound together.
And so were you working 104?
Yeah, I was working soft glass bead making. Yeah. And it was very much from the Cindy Jenkins era, making glass beads. And Cindy Jenkins was my first bead making teacher. I caught her in it was 1997 on her and her husband Ed were on tour promoting the Hothead porch, which she had a big hand in designing and distributing. And that's really, in my opinion, made a huge impact on the American glass bead movement because it made making available to whoever wanted it. I got my kit for $100 and then bam, I can make beads anywhere. So it really changed my life. And I'm not the only one. I've since met a whole bunch of other people who have like the same origin story. I think Cindy Jenkins as a person is really influential, and I'm lucky to have had her for my first teacher.
I'm just thinking about Moretti and all the
Mhm.
beautiful colors, and then you already have this color base. Were you
Yeah.
able to really apply that knowledge to your bead making? I bet that gave you such a leg up.
I was teaching right away and responding to what my community wanted to learn. And this is at a time where there was like no info. So I remember I used to teach color. A lot of my friends were designers and, friends from art school, and they were all very particular about color, as designers and painters can be. So one of the skills I had to learn was how to custom mix colors to Pantone color, the glass colors to Pantone colors reliably for designers. That was one of the early like specialty classes that I taught. Now, they've expanded the color palette quite a bit, so we don't need to do that anymore. But I can just remember the old days of like I taught from there was a book that written by Drew Fritz, this marble book. I think it's called Torchworth Marbles by Drew Fritz. There was a section in the back about color mixing, 104 Effetray glass. And I used that as the basis for the class. There were all these formulas for how to like basically make these colors that were augmenting the palette. And so that's what we would do in class. It was like a guided exercise for how to produce these color match these colors, which is funny because that I just now connected. That's what I used to do in the paint store. But yeah,
Yeah, that's so
isn't
cool.
that wild?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes perfect
So
sense.
yeah, and I was a color tester early on for Double Helix and for CIM as well through the old days when Arrow Springs used to be like a distributor for color through mail order. You get like the mail order catalog and then you like send them in your thing. And yeah, color always is a very important part of my life and kind of the way I orient myself. But I remember the 104 palette when it was still only like 50 or 60 colors before even the like the copper green and stuff was like I remember when copper green came out, one of my favorite colors in the late 90s. So I'm old enough to remember before we had all this expansion in the palette. Early attempts to try to make that for myself and then just imagine how satisfying that was when those colors were actually like produced on a larger scale and I didn't have to mix them anymore. I just like really appreciated that.
Yeah, yeah, I bet. I
Yeah.
bet. Yeah, all the time. And you're doing all this on a hothead torch. Should you move away from that?
Yeah.
Because that adds an extra element to your color mixing, right? Are you encasing a lot of it
Yeah.
in here?
No, I mean, I think it's all about like you'd be surprised what rules you can break. Let's just say that when you have not a lot of resources, but a lot of time, you find ways to break the rules. And that's sort of like the story of my career. So I've trained myself to do a lot of things that shouldn't seem possible. And it's really just because I didn't know any better. So I just kept persevering until I found a workaround. The hothead was my favorite torch for like the first 8 or 9 years of my practice, even though I had a mid range. That was my first oxypropane torch. And I got that in like 98. But I didn't use it that much because it was expensive to run. I love the economy of the hothead, and that's the torch I taught on. I was the only one that I knew in all of Chicago that had an oxypropane torch, but there are other people who had hotheads. So I think I don't know. I like the hothead better for a while there. And also I like to work slow and cool too. A lot of my designs rely on working slow and cool. Now with borosilicate and other types of glasses, that tends to be my approach. And that's why my work looks a little different than other people. It's from that early history. So I never knew it was restricted firepower compared to the other torches until later on. And I didn't have much problem with the reduction. I actually played into it. I would add my studio was in at Lil Street Art Center for most of that time, and I had access to this. It was it's a ceramics facility, and I had access to the glaze kitchen. So I would go down to the glaze kitchen and get all kinds of like powdered materials used to make glazes, and I would just sprinkle them right in, And I was changing the colors right out of the gate in the hothead with an affinity towards the reduction colors. So I guess you could say that the hothead expanded my palette, not restricted it. And that was part of out of like, there was nobody there to tell me otherwise. So I did my own research, and my own research went into the science of glaze chemistry and how that could be applied to glass. And I ended up publishing some of that data through the ceramics community in a magazine and a book before I went to grad school. So it did kind of culminate in a formal research project,
That's
which
so
was how to
cool.
flame work on clay.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
glass clay fusion. Yep,
What was your undergrad degree in?
painting. But
Then,
but I went to School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and there were no grades and no majors in order to. That's the mission of the school, and that's in order to encourage cross departmental collaboration. which I did a lot of. But yeah, my studio was anchored in the painting department. My timeline, my history was all anchored very firmly in the painting department. I went in a painter, I came out a painter.
And then did you decide to leave Chicago and then apply for like grad schools, or did the grad school make you leave Chicago? Was that a big deal to move out of that
Mm,
community that you built as a young adult?
it was it was a graduation. It was a choice. I felt I had been in Chicago for 12 years at that point, and I was teaching, I was running a studio, I was exhibiting my work. But I think when you are involved in a community for, long term, like over a decade, what happens is sometimes it's harder to sort of like reach the upper echelons of opportunities available because my colleagues were all people that I had started with, right? And so it's hard to sort of overcome the who you were at the beginning of your journey, right? So sometimes I think at some point we need like a fresh start, right? Where we can reset all of the possibilities. And so for me, I decided that would be grad school. I decided to move to the East Coast, move to New York and back to the East Coast where I'm from, and kind of have a fresh start as far as dropping into a new community and making a new set of opportunities for myself. Chicago felt a little limiting, I guess, at a certain point. And also, I knew it was time for school because that publication I mentioned through Ceramics Monthly, that article, that research project that then got documented and distributed as an article, proved to me that I worked on that research project for a few years. It was at least 2 years of R&D, and then a full cycle of research that came to fruition and got published. And so I that really is what got me started thinking about grad school applying, because that's grad school caliber research. And that was the project that actually I reached out to some schools and said, hey, I have this project I just finished. Do you think I could continue this study at your school? So that's sort of like the bridge and how I got onto thinking about going to grad school.
So then that's what you did. You just up and
Mm-hmm.
moved and you continued working on that study, or did you keep shifting? When did
I
borosilicate start
sh-
coming in?
I shifted. I had experimented with borosilicate early on. I had the capacity and I was working borosilicate in my studio early on. I just wasn't that interested in it. And also it's mostly because it was very expensive and the color palette was so limited. And we're talking about still we're in the 90s, right? In the early 2000s, where like either if you want to get color, which I'm a color person, right? Then it's either like very, very expensive and I'm just going to ruin it, right? Because I'm learning. So I just couldn't justify that. And then the other option was mixing your own colors, John Burton style, right? Sue Ellen Fowler, John Burton style, with mixing oxides on a test tube. I was doing that. I was much more interested in that because that was related to this like glaze chemistry work that I was doing with the soft glass. And I had also developed methods for flame working borosilicate on clay in 2005, 2006 as well. So that was a material that I was working with. I just wasn't, my main inquiry came later when I had embodied skills. But as a material to think with, absolutely.
Tell us more about what you did during grad school. You moved and started working for another floral company, right? And your goal was
Yeah.
to continue your research project. How did that turn out?
Yeah.
Did everything stay on course or did you shift?
Some of each, little column A, little column B. I ended up wrapping up that Glasses Glaze project and publishing it, documenting it, and exhibiting it, and whatever. And I felt like that was at a close. So when I left to go to grad school, I was right around that time, I was approached by another researcher in the UK, Jessamy Kelly, who was writing her PhD, doing her PhD dissertation on glass clay fusion. So her degree was one degree higher than mine, right? And so she asked me if I would consider sharing my research so that she could use it as a case study in her. She was compiling research from all over the world from people who were doing glass clay fusion. So I ended up sharing, basically passing off my research to her. And then she continued it. I moved on to other inquiries at that point formally. It came back around later though through student work, but yeah, so Jessamy, she published a PhD. She is the one of the leading researchers now with glass clay fusion. She developed a whole bunch of product lines and artwork from that. So it kind of freed me to start new inquiries. I moved to New York with kind of a clean slate. The challenge I set for myself was to question what was essential in my practice. And I was willing to let everything go and see what came back. And that includes glass. I I let glass go too. I let everything go. And then I went to grad school and said, all right, well, let's see what just organically comes back into my practice. Whatever comes back, I know is essential. And so what came back right away was glass. I had my hothead and I set it up in my studio at Pratt. I wasn't supposed to, but I did. And I just made beads, just on my own. No one even knew. And then floral design came back right away too, because I needed a way to support myself. It's expensive. So I ended up, as far as my what was happening in the studio, my attention started going to language and the limits of language, the philosophy of language, and how painting for me is this visual philosophy. It has the capacity to hold my thinking. And so I wanted to really do a deep dive into like painting as a vessel in a way and how that functions historically and contemporarily and what that means in my practice. So my grad school work was very much about like the limits of language and how the brain processes visual input because the brain processes like reading English, for example, differently. It's cumulative than a visual image, right? Like a painting, which is pretty like, the brain takes that in all at once. So I was challenging way that we process visual information and challenging what the boundaries of these sort of containers in my practice are and what they can hold.
Did you find glass community during that time too, or you were just kind of working privately on your hothead and not really intermingling with the glass community around you? Or was there a glass
Well,
community around you during that time?
I didn't know about the glass community until 9 years into my practice. I read about it, but I was isolated in Chicago, and there were like one or two other people who I still know. No, we were the glass community, like we made it in Chicago at the time. So there was like one other hot shop, and then I had the flame working program, and then now there's a whole bunch, but those are from our students. I started the program at Lil Street, the glass program at Lil Street, to make community. And then the first time I met up with anybody else, I met other glassblowers, was actually when I went to Pill Shop in 2006. So I had already been flame working for like 9 years. And this is the first time I really met the glassies, right? Or anybody who worked in a hot shop or anything like that. It was a little bit of a shock. So when I moved to New York, I knew of this glass community, but I wasn't necessarily a part of it. I was pretty insulated. And as a flame worker, I mean, I think that's a lot of people's journey too, because our equipment's portable. We don't rely on institutions for access as much. And so we tend to have a little bit of a more of autodidactic or, individualized journey of learning. And that was definitely my case. So when I moved to New York, I did have my torch set up in my studio, but I knew of a group studio within walking distance of my apartment. A friend of mine worked at Urban Glass and she was the director of the bead project. And she had been wanting me to get involved in that because I knew of it and I was teaching a program in Chicago that was modeled off the bead project. Having a little kind of poking around at Urban Glass while I was in grad school. But then when I graduated from Pratt with my grad degree, Urban Glass offered me a job and I ended up teaching and I built a whole department there and took over as director of the bead project. I did meet up with the glass community, but it wasn't until later in my grad school journey.
Do you think that in a lot of ways, maybe that offered you more freedom versus being held back with the way that you're playing and exploring? If you had known or been more immersed into the glass community, that maybe that would have limited you more?
Yeah, it's hard to say, but I did have some experiences that were not positive with trying to share my research, my published research with institutions. That's how I ended up choosing to go to grad school for painting and move to New York was because I actually didn't, it wasn't a good fit for me to go like study glass or I couldn't find the in. Creative freedom is one of the most important things in my practice. I'm not going to be restrained. And so I've always been sort of institutionally fringy as far as a part of a community, but I'm also connected to a lot of community. I'm much more interested in what happens at the edges than what happens in the middle. And so when I interact with institutions, it ends up being in that way as a collaborator and not like right in the hub in the middle of what's, and that allows me the creative freedom. I want to be on the exciting edge of what can the material do that we don't know yet. And that's kind of always my angle with whatever material I'm using. How can we push this? Like, what is there to learn? What kind of journeys can we go on with this material? Yeah.
What class did you take when you went to Pilchuck?
I studied with Vittorio Costantini, who's an amazing, amazing teacher in person, Italian master. He must be in his 80s now, and he focuses on botanical and insect replicas of, or mostly like fish and insect from his childhood growing up in the lagoon. They're lifelike, and he pushes the boundary. Like he can do. It's mostly, I think, because he just has this long-term relationship with the glass. When I worked with him, he had been a glass worker for at least 40 years. So that's where he was at with his relationship with the material. But I remember just being in awe of watching him seemingly be able to break the laws of physics, right? And I was like, that right there, that's what I want to do. He knew so much about what the material limits were in the physical world that he could anticipate what was going to happen. And so what ended up happening was he would collaborate with the material to kind of finesse the rules. There was logic attached to that he transferred to me, the right teacher at the right time for me. And I feel like as traditional as his work could be considered, I would also say that he's a major rule breaker as well in how he makes things. And he taught me a lot of, he kind of gave me permission to break the rules in institutions as long as it's accompanied with logic and grace. Those are the rules that I try to keep for myself these days too.
So cool. And so then you're at Urban Glass, you're doing all of the things, keep taking us
Yep.
down that route. Are you able to find a balance between working and helping build this studio and building your own body of work? Or do you feel like sometimes you lost a little bit of your own creativity?
Well, I think balance is a practice, never like a destination. Sometimes I'm good at balance, and sometimes I'm not good at balance. I think we all go through phases when like everything's vibing and sync, and then other times it's clunky, and you're like, I don't have enough time to get all this done. So I think I had a little bit of each. But I can say this: as far as my life plan, ever since I was a kid, plan A is to be an artist. And also, I always wanted to be a teacher. Whenever I was a kid, people asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, artist and teacher. And the teacher was because my parents were like, well, you need to pay your bills. So let's just have a practical edge on that too. There was a little bit of that. When it comes to me being an adult and living in the world and managing all of these things, right? I'm still on plan A and I have never, ever like veered from it even though it's taken me through some really rough waters, I've always prioritized my practice, even though sometimes my practice shrinks to where there was this one time where I was traveling, I was sort of nomadic traveling on trains, like out of the country, I don't know, extended period of time. And my studio was in a suitcase. My studio expands and collapses to adjust to how much space I have for it, but it never, ever, ever goes away. So it did shrink a little bit in those early years in New York. And so the output was primarily beads. And beads expanded into a larger project when I used them socially because I was bartering with them. I have my own economy. So I'm making physically these little objects where I don't need that much time or space to do that. But then the impact that they have conceptually is large.
I love that. Can you keep taking us down the road of your body of work to where you are now?
Yeah. So a big point for me was after grad school. Well, it got a little hairy there. I got a little nomadic for a few years, and I was doing this trade route project where I was bartering with my own currency for about 6 years. And I relocated around the country, but it didn't matter because I was just permanently on the road. Basically. At that time, my work, I was really, two things were happening. One, I was continuing these material investigations, glass and with other materials, and also with painting. I was still actually painting for a while. So that's sort of what was going on privately. And then publicly, what was happening with my work is I was still showing painting and image making, image based work. And then the beads started to have a focus right after grad school, I had to stop doing floral design because I had a anaphylactic, I developed this occupational allergy. I had to retire from that. I can't physically touch some of those materials anymore. I segued right into jewelry, which is what I was ended up at the end of my floral career specializing in wearable flowers, or we call them personal flowers. So I just kind of and there was glass involved in that. So that I kind of transitioned into just making a wearable line The wearable part was because I adore my own body. I definitely, in phases of my life, consider my own body to be like a canvas or a gallery, very fashion oriented. But also, it suited my lifestyle of this nomadic lifestyle. And that way, I'm able to live with my art. So that became sort of like my more dominant or public thread of my work. But there's also all this R&D happening at the same time because what I really wanted to do with the glass was to paint with it. And when I say paint, I mean explore, not physically paint. Be able to do the same type of journey or the same sort of like, here's a blank canvas. I don't know where I'm going to go with this. I just know that something's going to happen. It's going to transform me. And in the end, I'll be left with an artifact, maybe. That's what I wanted to do with glass. And it took me 25 years to build up enough skills that were embodied to be able to even start on that journey. I've only recently been able to realize that part because glass is so hard to work with.
Were you able to make that shift away from floral design? Did you feel like your whole world was ending, or did you
No,
feel it was that moment, like it was a sign that you had to do it?
it was such a relief because like coming out of grad school, like it was helpful to work floral design. Like I had a high profile job. It was a senior designer at a Soho flower firm. It was a major design job, and I worked that all through school. So it was in a way a relief because I was teaching. I was teaching flame working. I had my own practice, and then I was also doing floral design. One of those things needed to go. The trifecta, as I called it, had gotten me through undergrad, that intermediate time, and then grad school. But it was like, all right, now it's time, like focus. One of these things needs to go, and I couldn't decide. So when I developed the allergy, kind of like a blessing in disguise, I knew right what it was. It was like the universe telling me, like, kind of eliminating one of those tracks, and I was ready for it. I bid it farewell, and I moved on.
Yeah, yeah, it was your out. Back to
Yeah,
teaching
and
and
actually,
art.
well, that was right around when I started teaching college, glassblowing formally at Salem Community College. And that really changed. It changed the seriousness of my teaching. I really love teaching and I see teaching as a creative expression, but also like it intersects with my creative practice in so many ways as well. At that point, once floral design was eliminated, it just became about having my own studio, maintaining that, all of my material explorations and my own work and teaching. And I started doing fabrication as well for other artists, which was a big way, like some manufacturing. That accelerated my learning because I'm self taught. I've only ever taken that one class. I think I took another maybe one or two workshops since then, but I am self taught. I learned through working, making work for other people. And my own work is just pretty much R&D, material inquiry, these like journeys that I go on through these materials.
I love that. Can you talk about how your connection with Salem began? Did you just see a job open up and you
No,
apply, or?
in order to teach college, you have to have a master's degree. It's a state law in New Jersey. At the time, we're talking like, 2000, right, I graduated in 2010, so this was like 2012 or so. All the glass people know each other. There aren't that many of us. And there, especially at that time, aren't that many people who have an MFA, who are qualified to teach, and who are flame workers. I moved my studio to Philadelphia in, I think, 2012 or 13, and just reached out to a couple of the glass people from the community. And immediately they said, oh, well, do you want to teach? We need a teacher. My first teaching job in college was I taught with Paul Stankard. It was his last, he had been teaching all of the artistic flameworking classes at Salem, and I believe he started that. We team taught his last semester there, and then I took over those classes and rewrote them and built off them. So yeah, I got to teach with Paul. It was awesome. Yeah, it sort of continued from there.
What's it like teaching there now?
So my first stint at Salem, I was there for, I don't know, like I think 6 or 7 semesters, I think it was. And I taught just in the glass art department. There's two glass programs. There's the scientific glass technology program, which is like over 65 years old. And then we have the glass art program, and both focus have flame working classes. So that's my specialty. So my first stint, I taught all the flame working classes. Like there's a couple different levels, and I taught the co-working class and helped rewrite and develop all of that curriculum to update it to be in line with not just glass art, but contemporary sculpture, like the language we use, the assignments, the conceptual, what these forms can hold conceptually, the prompts. structure of the class, much more in line with studio classes I had taken, like in other materials, right? And then I took 5 years off. I left the school, went to go teach at another school for a while, and came back. And now I've been back for 5 years. And I was invited back to work in the scientific glass technologies department and write new curriculum for their program. And I wrote the curriculum for plasma design, which teaches the students how to work under design and fabricate plasma tubes or gas discharge tubes. And that's not just for artistic production, it's also for industrial fabrication as well. So all of the skills that the students use to make the bulbs are transferable and they can use on the job as scientific glass blowers. So we also built our design and built our manifolds we used to fill all the bulbs with. It's a technical class and it's drawing from my experience as a fabricator, which is how I interface with the scientific glass blowers. So that's what I'm teaching now. It's very technical and it's about the material, like what the material can. And there's some artistic expression there, but the main emphasis is how do we predict what's going to happen and do it in a way that is going to serve us?
Do you feel like your experience as a woman going into that field has been pretty safe and I want to say fair, or do you feel like
No.
maybe you've had to fight a little bit more to, yeah, you have
Yeah.
anything that you
Oh,
want to share
yes.
about that?
Just generally, yes, but specifically, no. And I will say, I have a sort of a side project going on right now. I'm a facilitator of the Flame Affinity Group, which is a geeks glass education exchange. We're like an online glass startup. Part of the Flame Affinity Group, the work we do there is to document some of the inequities in the community and to document just what it feels like to be an artist. Like, what are the conditions that are causing pressure on artists these days, specifically flame workers, right? And just the sociological and societal and cultural and economic pressures that we have. So in that group, I have documented, and as well as all of the other my other cohorts and collaborators in there, my thoughts on that those inequities. And I don't want to speak bad publicly about institutions, but I will say that it's an ongoing challenge. And no, I wouldn't say there's a lot of fairness. And I would say in all of the institutions that I've worked at, glass is among the worst as far as fairness and gender biasness, and those are issues that affect me daily still, and I don't see anything changing anytime soon. Really, we chip away at it, but at least now we have a community of other folks who can support each other. So that's how I've handled the situation. At first, it was just unpacking what the situation and identifying where the inequities are. And then I said, well, what can I do about this? Because it's very traumatizing. A lot of these events of being treated unfairly, especially in an employment situation or an institution which has laws about these, that isn't always the way people choose to behave. So I decided to do something about it by forming community where we could support each other and support each other through the trauma of just the reality of having to deal with this situation. And that's partially what the Flame Affinity Group became for me. Also, a way to just document and validate that these experiences are happening because there's gaslighting that happens too. And so it's my hope for the next generation that we can do what we can to try to hand off the community to the next generation so they won't have as much trauma from having to deal with all this stuff. But also, more importantly, I want the next generation of artists and teachers to have community so that when they do experience inequities and unfairnesses, then they can not have it be as devastating. They can overcome it more quickly and have community and support. And that seems to be going pretty
I
well.
love that. That was good.
Yeah,
What are the students like there now? Are they from all different walks of life? Is that
they
really
are.
cool to
My
see?
students are fantastic. And, I have an interesting perspective because I've kind of, this is my second stint at Salem 10 or 15 years ago when I was there. It was a very different demographic. It was mostly local. It was like right as the pipe stuff was blowing up. So I was teaching in that environment. It's very much part of the dialogue. It's still pretty misogynistic. Weren't even a lot of female students. LGBTQ plus students were not present or not out because it was not safe. And so we didn't have a lot of representation. It was a tough social scene. And we've done a lot of work on that community since. And I'm one of the people specifically who has a team of us, but this is one of the things that I'm specifically interested in is helping to change the culture around flame working to make it more inclusive so that folks who have been marginalized in the past maybe can have access to this community through the institution now. So now I'm happy to say that although not everyone might feel totally safe, we feel safer, and we're not alone now. Last year, we graduated, a good percentage of our scientific degree was women, at least like 6 or 7, that's major, who are going out into the field now as professionals. And we also have LGBTQ population in our school as well, which that's new. I'm finding that the students are coming and wanting to express themselves through their art now, and we're making a place for that, a safe place, trying to make it safer in school for them to do that. And I love being part of that work. It's work. It's not perfect, but it's important. So that's the work I'm engaged with now at school. And my students drive that.
I love that. What kind of work are you doing for yourself right now? What are you focusing on in your individual practice?
That leap I talked about earlier, wanting to make a paint with glass, happened. It happened sometime in the last 10 years. And it wasn't like a big party. Oh, this is happening. Just sort of suddenly happened. And then one day I was like, wait, I can do what I need to do now with this material. So now I'm firmly exploring like what painting was doing before. I'm like going on these adventures with glass, and I'm sculpting mostly with borosilicate these days. Although I still work with all different types of glass, not even just beyond soft glass and borosilicate. I also work with aluminosilicate, a little bit of quartz, lead glass, all different types. Borosilicate has been great structurally to work with because it supports a lot of these ideas that I have of how I want glass to behave in space or not do in space. I've been really focusing on that, pushing the edge of borosilicate as a sculptural material. The exercise is teach me something new, not here's a drawing, let me just fabricate that to specs, which I also know how to do. People pay me to do that. But in my own work, I want to improvise, I want to explore, I want to discover, and then I want to kind of like pick the good, the things that are discoverable and build off those. So I'm working on a series of sculptures right now that is very painterly as far as that painterly exploration of not knowing where I'm going and what it's going to turn out to be. I don't know if these are going to be objects or what. They're objects right now. And I love not knowing. And especially when I think about the history in the current history of this material of glass, and I look at what the popular use of glass is, my work is nothing like that. I don't really connect to glassy formats and the studio glass history. I feel like if anything, my work is a rejection away from that, like Italian technique and all that. I can do it. People pay me to do it, but I don't use those techniques in my own work. I just use the ability to do that to push against. So I'm much more interested in exploring new uncharted territory.
That's so cool.
So yeah. And pushing scale. I've been pushing scale. And my new sculptures, some of them are 7, 8 feet long. Borosilicate really holds my ideas, and there aren't very many limits that I've found with it. And I think a lot of that has to do with now I'm in my third decade of working with the material. When I worked with Vittorio, early on in my career, and he was 40 years in, I'm approaching that point with the long-term relationship with the material where it's like we're an old married couple, and like I can predict a little bit more predictably what it's about to do. And therefore we can dance together instead of like butting heads. We still do that sometimes, but most part we're on
I love that for you. I
the
love that. We went through most of my questions. I don't know if you have something else that you wanted to make sure to talk about. Otherwise, I like to ask if you have any final words of wisdom to share with people.
Yeah, I do have a couple things. One big thing is some of the insights that I've gleaned just from reflecting on my own journey I've had the privilege to be on the same plan my whole life. And not everybody has that. If you aspire to be an artist in any way, don't give up because it's a lot harder to give up and then get back on the track than if you just scale it, right? Keep a place in your life for your creative inquiries, no matter what your life circumstances are. Even if it shrinks to just like 15 minutes a week, keep some space, keep the dream alive, keep the inquiries alive. Just slow it down and make it smaller. And then it can expand. There are times in your life where it will just expand and contract, and that's okay. So I think that's a big thing. the artistic journey is not linear, it's cyclical, and for me at least. And so recognizing my own patterns has been really helpful, and taking time to reflect on what I've learned and apply that to the challenges moving forward has helped me grow faster and get to where I am as a glass worker. Because, like I said, I'm self taught. So there isn't anybody prompting me to reflect or, carry these lessons forward. I have to do that all myself. So, everybody else out there, too, make sure you take time, go through your notebooks, take time to think about your journey and glean what you can. Because sometimes there's some insights that you're not ready for. So, you go back through that info and think about it again. And keep going. Don't quit. Keep going. Do your
Good.
own thing. Be yourself. No matter what the market or whoever says, if you have to do your own thing and not show anyone, do it. You
Yeah.
value your art, not the market at the
Hmm.
core of it. Everything can be converted into a product or sold after the fact, but to satisfy your soul as an artist, you got to keep that real, whatever your inquiry is.
So good. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It was so cool.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for the time and the space and the opportunity to talk with you. Thanks for the questions.
Yeah,
And
no. Yeah. Oh, it's so good.
thanks to everybody listening too.
Once more, my name is Dominique Casey, Caissie. You can find Amy, AMYLEMAIRE Studio on Instagram. And you can find Shaping Stories all the places that you can listen to podcasts. And please consider checking out my past podcast project, Connected in Glass, where my friend Christina, who just recently passed away, and I had interviewed over 90 artists